I'm Jim Collison and live from the Gallup studios here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called the Coach, recorded on June 16th, 2017. Called the Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions or comments during this live webcast, we do have a chat room that's available for you right below the main video window. If you just look down below there on our live page, by the way, best place to listen to Called the Coach is off our live page. But hit the login button, bottom left-hand corner, choose the guest account, put your name in where it says guest, and then hit sign in or hit submit. And that will put you in the chat room. We'll be taking your questions live during the program as well, and we love to have those. If you're listening to this the recorded version of this or have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions for small, medium, or large organizations, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strength Center, just gallupstrengthcenter.com for your coaching, all your Clifton Strengths coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video and streaming and now downloadable audio for offline listening. If you want to listen to this as a podcast, we have that available for you as well. That's all done at our coaches blog, and all the resources are there, coaching.gallup.com. Tom Matson is our guest today. Tom's Gallup's strategist, architect, and lead writer for CliftonStrengths for Students, our brand new renamed book that's out there. And Tom, welcome to Called the Coach.
Yeah, thanks so much.
No, good to have you. We want to catch up a little bit with you. Why don't, before we dig into this, can you just kind of give our listeners a little background on you, your favorite parts about yourself, including your top five?
Include my what?
Including your top five.
Good. How about this? For my top five, the best way to say what I love to do is I love to strategize ways to improve people. And so you can start to weave in what I'm trying to say there in terms of my strengths. I like to do so quickly within a room. And that's really an important thing for me to be thinking about always. And again, Jim, I see you as unique. And I want to be seen as unique as well. What do I do at Gallup? When I first came to Gallup 10 years ago, I was on our executive leadership practice, and we got to create a bunch of really neat leadership programming for Fortune 500 companies. About 3 years in, this great person that's a mentor at Gallup who knew that I had this mission heart drew me in and said, Tom, we'd love to have you do more within the world of education. And so when I first came on, we were doing a lot of strength sessions and trying to figure out what that would look like across education. Early on, we were mostly in at career centers and a lot of faith-based schools, and we had to figure out how do we grow our business model. So that's what I've been doing the last 7 years. And today I write for Gallup Press, I keynote, and I grab a marker and some flip charts and whiteboards and work with campuses about how do you chart out the right course to really impact points of pain for the organization, students, and everything that's happening on campus.
Yeah, we got some great stuff to talk about the campus, about the university campus today. But let's do a little basics before we dive into that. StrengthsQuest is now Clifton Strengths for Students. We're making some changes. As we think about our coaches and the folks that are listening to this, Tom, what are some of the basic things they need to know? Why did we move that direction? What are we trying to do there? Can you just talk a little bit about those mechanics?
Yeah, Carol Dweck out of Stanford University would challenge us in the fact that you have a fixed or growth mindset. And I think early on, we were kind of living out of a fixed mindset, and I know I was. And so we were doing a lot of self-awareness sessions around strengths on campuses. And StrengthsQuest was really, action items were, I'm an achiever, I like to work hard, how can I work hard within school, which are wonderful, but was kind of stopping at self-awareness. We had a lot of campuses that were stopping at top five. If I walked around at those schools, they would know their top five and they wouldn't know what to do with them, how it can impact their engagement or well-being on a campus. And so over time, we began to introduce all of Gallup science, and we began to start to merge it together. Strengths, engagement, and well-being is one conversation with everything we've been doing. That shifted us up to the executive level, that shifted us away from validity challenges to, wow, this is a great way for us to impact our university. We're now at most of, or a lot of the largest schools in America. Our retention rate for clients is around 95% because they understand the why, and strengths is the how. The why is engagement, well-being, strengths is the how. Boy, we really started to work with executive teams around that same thing. So how did we write the book? We wrote it from that perspective, what we knew the world has shown us before in terms of that strengths, engagement, well-being conversation. And then we worked with Purdue University to do the Gallup Purdue Index. And we started to look at long-term thriving well-being and engagement. So we took what we knew, we took what we were seeing long-term, and that's how we wrote the action items and rewrote the book.
Before we talk about Gallup Purdue Index and its important, piece in what we're doing here, I want to back up a little bit. You said well-being several times, and you said it in the context of strengths, engagement, and well-being, and we kind of roll through that. And yet well-being is a really, really important part of what you're doing and the way we're going about this. Can you dig in a little bit of that for me? Because I think our coaches really understand strengths and engagement. In fact, I teach a 2-day course in universities around strengths discovery and engagement, how to measure those two. But why well-being? Why is that such an important part of this trifecta as we think about success on the campus? Can you dig in a little bit of that for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So when early on we were saying, boy, strengths and engagement is one conversation, we were kind of seeing that impact. The problem within the world of education, there's lots of views on what engagement is. So we were kind of getting into some debates out there in terms of what is engagement, what is it not. And then Tom Rath, who really loved studying what Don had done around a life well lived, expanded that. So he started to look at what is well-being. And we started a poll around the world around this idea of well-being. And for us, within the world of education, boy, it fits mission perfectly. So when I work with executives at a university or strengths advisory team, I'm going to go in and I'm going to put up those 5 areas of well-being and ask really what I believe is a strength-based question. Where are you at your very best as a university here? They say, boy, we're really good at creating strong community, but we're really not very good at, really developing great, meaningful relationships with professors and mentors and students, that combination. So they're thriving in community, but they're off in social well-being. Or they would say, our students are coming here, they want to graduate with a great job, but the purpose, well-being of what we're doing on campus is a little bit off. And we started to see how those were so deeply contagious. Because if the follow-up question is obvious, is that if you say, boy, if you're not helping your students develop meaningful relationships with professors and each other, how does that impact retention? Well, they would say, boy, we're off there. So we began to use well-being as a strategic framework. So when we work with schools, we would say strengths is not an outcome. Well-being is an outcome and engagement is an outcome. But first, let's look through a strategic lens of well-being and figure out what you do well, where you're off. In fact, it's even, you could even link it to the marketing of what they're doing. They'll say, boy, here's where I'm at my best. We are really good at this and we're really off in this. And I bring up the website and say, you're really good at it, but where is it on your website? How come we're not seeing that really flow through your marketing? And I think the last thing is we saw so many campuses stopping at self-awareness and doing top 5 sessions around the campus that they started to miss the mark for why. So my favorite question to ask when we're about to look through that well-being strategic lens is I'll walk in the room and say, if I'm a parent, which I am, both my kids are in school and college, and I'll say, if I was a parent and I walked around to all of campus, I asked faculty, staff, students, why strengths? What would you say? And they would start to list 15, 20, 30 things. I'd whiteboard them and we'd get them out there. And I would ask the follow-up question, are you on the same page? And they say, absolutely, look at all those things. And I would say, absolutely not. I'm totally confused. And they would laugh and they would say, oh, that's true. We have a challenge. So now we use those 5 areas of well-being as the strategic framework for a strategic message of the why. So one of the large schools we're working with in the Midwest would say, we're using a strength-based approach on our campus to impact career and community well-being. We know that career and community well-being impact the engagement and well-being of our students short-term and long-term. And then they typically weave it in with the president's message as well. So now we're honing in on points of pain, things they want to improve on, and things they do well. And that's why we're using strengths on campuses.
Tom, one of the areas we don't talk a lot about in strengths is just diet, nutrition, those physical well-being components. And students they're on campuses and they're stressing themselves out, staying,
Right.
pulling all-nighters, they're eating in the cafeteria. Does that come up in the conversations, these elements of physical well-being, of keeping the students healthy, physically healthy while they're on campus? Does that play in as an outcome, and how are you tying strengths to that?
Yeah, so by asking that question, what do you do well, where are you off your game, we start to, first of all, that individualizes the strength strategic plan, because every school is different. And so sometimes people will call and say, tell us what to do. And we'll say, tell us who you are, and let's look through this lens. We'll figure it out. So we have a lot of schools that would say, we're struggling with some mental health issues. Mental health, depression, anxiety, suicide, all these things are increasing, sadly, across the country. And so we have some schools that are really blunt with that. They're authentic with that. And they're saying that's something that we want to aim strengths at. And so how do we use a student's top 5 to get them past that spot of struggling or suffering with their well-being? So one of my favorites is a school in California. We can't do this in Minnesota as much, but in California, the president said they're going to use their top 5 and the students' top 5 to find ways to create action plans on campus that they can improve their health, to decrease the amount of stress that their students are facing. So every single day, the president walks at lunch. He will schedule nothing at lunch, and he walks, and he encourages students to walk with him every single day. And of course, for him as a leader, it's a chance for him to ask great questions of students and help draw them into this community. And so the great thing about a university is they are set up around those 5 areas of well-being. They have career centers, that's purpose well-being, financial aid, financial well-being, physical wellness centers are popping up everywhere. And this whole thing around mentoring and roommates comes into social well-being, and community well-being is obviously the clubs, organizations, and res life. And you could see how all those weave together. And you can also see how it makes a campus unique at the same time. In fact, when I sit down with an executive leader, I never start with strengths. I always put those 5 areas of well-being in front of them and say, how are you doing? Where are you thriving? Where are you a little bit off your game right now? And recently I was working with an executive in New Zealand, and she said, Tom, my physical well-being is at a spot of suffering. Well, how does it impact other areas? And she said, boy, my best friend at work, that well-being question, I really pulled back from that person. And my social well-being, I just really pulled back from my team. I'm not as present. I'm really thinking that my job feels a lot more stressful right now. And I don't think it's because of the job. I think it's because of my health. The follow-up question is obvious, is how does it impact how your talents look and feel? And she was once again authentic. And she said, my maximizer feels like a critical spirit. My poor team, it feels like they can't do anything right. And she went on and on to describe how dysfunctional they were looking. I didn't want her to be stuck there. So we said, what can we do to get you out of that spot? But I think sometimes at Gallup, we do this exercise called balconies and basements. And Jim, it would be like me coming to you and saying, hey, Jim, I'm your doctor. Something's wrong with your heart. It's in the basement. Well, any logical person would say, wait, time out. What's wrong with my heart? Triglycerides, cholesterol. Is it going down? Is the ship going down? Let me know. I want to know. And if instead of I ignored all that and said, well, Jim, I'm not going to tell you, but I want you to get it up to the balcony. You would say, wait a minute, I need to figure out what's going on there first. That's the well-being conversation. You start with saying, where are you at? What's something you're doing well? Where are you a little bit off? And then we pull in strengths. So that's how we're doing it across all of higher ed. That's how we do it with executive leaders as well.
Yeah, I spent a bunch of time as I think about my own physical wellness in my workouts, maximize or woo. I run with people, but I'm always trying to get better, always trying to make them better too. And so we strive every day to set new records, set new goals, even if it's just a little tiny bit. Like for me, I try to make this day better than it was yesterday. And,
I love that. Now, Jim, I only run if I'm chased. So that's something that
I know. I understand.
Really
like everyone
that you have, I don't have. But actually, right now, I'm on a walking treadmill desk. This is how I wrote the entire book. I went 2.5 miles per hour writing the entire book from this spot right here.
Yeah, no, and that's right. And that's what works for you, finding that environment. I don't want to spend, we had John to talk about the CliftonStrengths for Students book, but I think some coaches are going to ask, when we talk about well-being, what are the resources we have available if coaches wanted to get more information or dig in on this a little bit more? For some of them, this may be the first time they've ever thought about, maybe I need to start this strengths conversation from the 5 elements. What's the best way that we would recommend for them to start digging in on that concept, and what resources would we have for them?
Well, I love our well-being book. I'm a little bit biased, but I really do love it. I think it's an incredible resource. Ironically, the best resource, Jim, you were talking about this before we hopped on, the best resource we have is that person sitting across from us. And so if we just basically know the basic gist of those 5 areas, and then we say, how are you doing? We're not called to be experts. You're the expert. I'm called to ask great questions. But by having that ability to listen to how they're doing, boy, that's a great starting point. But I love the book. I love to start there. I love our Gallup Purdue Index study of saying, what about long-term thriving well-being and engagement? So coming back full circle to the book, that's really where we kind of led them in that thinking down that path. Boy, there's nothing more authentic about asking someone about those 5 areas of well-being and just letting them process. Boy, that's a great conversation.
And that book is just called Well-Being. You can find it shop.gallup.com. You can find it on Amazon as well. Tom, you'd mentioned, well, let's talk about Clifton Strengths for Students before we talk about the Purdue Index. Can you talk a little bit about, so StrengthsQuest, this is replacing StrengthsQuest. Can you give us some idea? It's certainly not just a replacement for it, and you wrote the book. So what's in it that's different? Where are we headed with that? And what are you hoping? How do you hope people will see that book?
I would say, if I'm really authentic, we had 2 bold audiences. One was a student affairs department and professional. Roughly about 70% of the budget on a college campus is driven through student affairs. First year experience, res life, career, it all kind of goes up to that spot. And their job is to retain and engage. They want, in fact, sadly, the retention rate in the United States is still less than 50%. That means that really half the people that are around you are not going to be there the next year. They're going to transfer. They just disappear. But the student affairs professionals are trying to figure out how to engage and retain and pull them in and allow them to thrive. So that was, in the back of my mind, that was really the audience I was writing to, because we could see their point of pain. We hear about it every day. Directly, we wrote it to the students. So StrengthsQuest was, again, really stopping at self-awareness. This is really creating an action. How do I get deeply involved on campus? How do I find best friends on campus? How do I create opportunities to learn and grow? So we're weaving this conversation around strengths, engagement, well-being. So we learned from mistakes early on when we were just doing top 5 and stopping at self-awareness. Many of those clients disappeared. They're gone. Speaking of retention, they walked away, and it's because the president said, what is the value? And our top clients at that point couldn't answer that. But today they could, and it's because of that knowledge we gained through that conversation of strengths, engagement, well-being. Now there's the shift. We went from a book that was really about strengths and some academics, things like this, to this is really a deep dive into helping students, faculty, and staff retain, thrive, grow, all those things. In fact, that's how we wrote the action items as well, as I said earlier, and that's really important to us. We want to see students be at their very best, not short-term, but long-term as well. We want students to leave a college campus and say, I can't imagine a world without that experience, because they were so engaged and so deeply taken care of and loved. Those things really matter to us. That's how we wrote the book.
Been a couple questions in the chat room about different age groups, starting with junior high, high school, college. Where is this appropriate? Where does this book fit in? Who can use it when we think about those different levels?
Yeah, I would say it's not for a middle school student. I was just at a public school at their leadership conference, and I sent them a copy ahead of time and said, what do you think? Where would you use this? And they said, we'd start around our junior year because we want to set them up to be successful for their next steps. In fact, we really hope that they go to a community or technical or 4-year university. And so we're going to use the book to start to prepare them for that. And so really that's what we targeted, that group. We're seeing more and more and more high schools say, we want to help our students take the next step. That's this book. And then it's for people that are really at the university level. Now, the challenge is we oftentimes think at the university level, it's between 18 to 22. That's no longer the case. I will be sitting in class and I'm next to a 30-year-old and next to an 18-year-old. And, I'm in my late 40s. We're all learning together. but the book could still be applied to the structure of a university in order to help them thrive. Now, with that said, recently I had someone else read it and they said, boy, I know you wrote it towards the university structure, but within my organization, we're kind of structured the same way. We too want to find mentors. We too want to help them feel cared about. So they said, we're going to use this book to be able to allow our organization to be able to thrive in terms of their well-being and engagement as well. So that's kind of how we wrote it. And that's kind of how I, focused in terms of focus on those outcomes that we know really do matter to that age group.
Tom, you've mentioned Gallup Purdue Index. How much did that? And so if folks don't know what that is, first of all, stop the video and go to Gallup.com and search Gallup Purdue Index. Like, pull that down and start reading it, because it's some amazing work. How much did the Gallup Purdue Index and the things we learned influence? Because we learned a lot about the college experience in that. Was there a lot of influence in that as you guys were putting the book together? Or
yeah, absolutely. Well, here's what was fun is we already knew those things from a best practice perspective. So some of our schools are driving the strengths engagement well-being conversation through faculty and staff, which we love. But we have a lot of our best practice that are using students to do that. The students are the mentors. The students are having those conversations, leading with a well-being conversation, which links to a strengths conversation. If we showed up on their campus and said, hey, are you a strength-based university? They said, well, sort of. That's what they say. We're sort of a university. We are a thriving well-being organization that uses strengths as our mechanism to impact those things. So we knew all these things. We were watching all these things take place, and we were watching students thrive more than ever before. In fact, one of my favorite stories was I was speaking at this conference, and we were talking about strengths and well-being as one conversation. I said, does anyone have any examples? And Kristen stood up, and Kristen was the opening story of the book, by the way. This is the same person. And Kristen said, I have a story. My friend, she has a relator. She has achiever. And boy, she really loves, her grades were something that she really loved and we're really proud of. And one day we noticed that she was only coming to the required meetings of our sorority. And the reason she was only coming to required meetings is she had this high responsibility, high achiever. She was going to be there. We noticed that she really pulled back from all of us who were in her kind of inner relator circle. So her social well-being was starting to be off. Her community well-being was starting to be off. We got her mid-semester grades, and now her grades were off. And we started to see her not eat as well, not get out and walk with us anymore. And so finally, a few of us in our relator circle came to her and said, what's going on? How are you doing? And she said, my parents just told me they're getting a divorce, and I'm not doing well. And sadly, at the end of them telling me about the divorce, they also said to me, they can no longer afford to send me back to the school. And so I'm leaving, and I'm sad. I don't want to leave. You are my community and my family. And I said, Kristen, what'd you do? And she said, oh, actually, we went with her, and we went to financial aid, explained it, and they redid her financial, student loans, things like that. We called their national sorority, we explained it, and she got a scholarship there. We began to walk with her every single day and make sure she was eating right, because that's what family does. We began to set up study groups with her, and we surrounded her as a community does. You can see all those areas of well-being coming into play. I said, what was the result? And she said, I don't know. Why don't you ask her? She's sitting next to me right now. So she stood up and she said, I'm graduating. By them understanding my well-being and my strengths, they changed my life. Here I am as soon to be a college graduate. In fact, the first within my family. It's powerful. And we're seeing these things take place left and right. And then we did the largest study of alumni that's ever been done, asking the same types of questions that we'd already been seeing really impacting our schools. And we began to see that there are a lot of commonalities. And basically what we were trying to get at is no matter what your age, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, we're trying to figure out who is thriving in their overall well-being and who is highly engaged. Then you could kind of package them together, and we kind of said, I wonder what they have in common. And that's how we really started to look at the Gallup Purdue Index. The Gallup Purdue Index was a measurement tool to be able to sort and help universities understand where they're at. We used it in the book, not as the data point, but we took those as learning outcomes and applied our full 34, each one, towards those learning outcomes. so students can understand these amazing things that alumni have taught them through this study. And then for student affairs, it's those things that they know matter to the retention. So we merge those together, and that's really how we wrote the book.
Megan asked from the chat room, is the book more overarching, philosophical, strength-based engagement well-being, kind of what we talked about? Or is it more step-by-step processes of how universities can get involved in this, combination of the two? Can you talk about how it's laid out?
Yeah, boy, early on, we were trying to figure out what is the step-by-step process for schools. And we failed because there is no step-by-step process, because a small liberal arts school is very different from a technical college, which is different from a community college, which is different from a 4-year. In fact, if we looked at the largest schools in America and compared it to even a small 4-year school, just smaller, they have different needs. And that's why it's so important to put up those 5 areas of well-being and figure out what do you do well, where are you off your game. And that's how we really always direct the conversation. So the book itself gives a lot of examples of what we know really matters to a school, but then the action items are really specific for a student to understand. This is how I take a deep dive into this place. This is how I find the right professor relationships. This is how I can connect to an internship. This is how I get involved in a long-term project. So those are real specific to the student one-on-one. And what does that link to? The strategic plan that we're working with, around 24 touch points over 4 years with the school.
Can you say touch points, but can you dive a little bit more into that? What does that mean?
Yeah, boy, again, I'm kind of saying this is what we've learned. This is what we did well. This is where we are off. Early on, we would say, strengths is basically a program within itself. And we saw a lot of what I would kind of call rah-rah sessions. We saw a lot of schools doing, hey, come to this fair and we're going to teach you about your top 5. And in fact, they called it a program within itself. And here's the challenge with that. We're not really playing off of the strengths of the school if we do that. And when a school tries to be to all things to all people, they're going to fail, because all they're doing is plate spinning, running around, having the same conversations. So recently I was at a school in the Midwest, and I was asking, boy, strategically, what do you do well? Where are you off with well-being? And they would say, this is what we do well. This is where we're off. And we then asked the follow-up question of, which of the areas of the school have the greatest amount of touch points, meaning the greatest amount of influence, the greatest amount of students interact with them within this area that you're kind of challenged by? They said, that's actually 3 areas: res life, academic advising, and we really put a great emphasis on leadership development here. So everything we do is about leadership development. So we looked at those 3 areas and said, how do we start to integrate strengths into what you're already doing well? That's a strength-based approach. And so we chart up 24 touch points over 4 years. First year experience, before they arrive, they're going to find out their top 5. That's a start of self-awareness. In the first year, you might walk down a residence hall and see, this is my top 5, this is my roommates. And then the res life staff is really looking at all 5 areas of well-being. They're going to walk into a room and say, hey, Tom, how you doing financially? It's a well-being question. And they're saying, where are you at your best in terms of you guys as roommates? Strength-based question. And so we started to see these interventions not around an assessment, rather strength-based questions. What do we do well as a band? What do we not do well? And so the next year, they start to maybe shift a little bit. Sophomore year is a hard year. We typically spend a majority of our money freshman year and on a college campus. Sophomore year is a little bit different. So we started to say, how do we help them get more meaningful connected to their professors? Really, how do we start to help them hone in, start to think about their major more? How do we help them with leadership? And again, we're piggybacking off what already exists on the campus, playing off their strengths, not seeing strengths as a program within itself, but piggybacking off 6 touch points. Why 24? Early on, we were trying to do, if we did 5 or 10 of these, I bet they're really going to understand. But one of my friends who passed away last year, early on when he was working with us around some research, he said, Tom, I wonder when a student moves away from just simply understanding their top 5 and rather takes on a strength-based lens. They began to look at all the areas of their life through this strengths lens. And I wonder at what point does the university have a tipping point that's what they start to do? And that's really how we started to look at the 24 by digging in and researching 24 touch points that already exist and not trying to be all things to all people. That means that school leaders, if a group says, "We come and talk to us about our top 5," they will say, "No, we're not going to do that, because you're going to have that over here. You're going to have that over here. And we're on a charted course throughout a student's tenure. They're going to know about how to get deeply engaged, how to have a meaningful relationships here on campus, and how to have a truly deep dive." And each school, I've never had a school that is following the same path. They're all unique. So helpful?
Yeah, no, I think so. Well, let's talk a little bit about, from people listening. We've got school coaches that will listen to this. They've been through our programs. They're currently coaching in schools. We've got some independent coaches that may be thinking about, how do I get involved in this movement that's going, they want to be in the higher ed space or in the ed space.
Right.
So what's the right way today, or what's a way or some ways for them to connect in? What's the best way for them to get involved in some of these things? And maybe we separate those by those already involved, if they're not, they're involved in an academic institution and not doing anything, and maybe some of those who are just coaches who are interested in jumping in on this.
Early on, when we were first really kind of launching StrengthsQuest, the self-awareness conversation was helpful and good, but then our economy shifted and endowments have started to dry up. There's a lot of schools out there with tremendous fear over, will they have enough money? And here's the challenge: is schools are trying to figure out, how do we keep our students here? How do we retain them? How do we engage them, and how do we help them thrive? But the problem is with shrinking endowments, less federal money coming in, and greater points of tension, what they've started to do is they've tried to draw in more students than ever before. So classroom sizes have increased. But boy, fear is a really big thing within the world of higher ed. By understanding the Gallup Purdue Index, we start to say to university leaders, we believe in a strength-based approach. We believe that changes lives, but we believe, as leaders who want to work alongside you, that you need to understand what these things are that matter long-term and while you're here. We have to lead with outcomes. We have to lead with this chance for them to understand that strengths is how, not why. And when we start to, you as coaches, when you start to say, I want to partner with you to help you understand how you could change culture, thus improve retention, thus improve your engagement. I mean, let's be honest. If a graduate graduates and says, I loved that experience, it was so powerful, my life was changed, do we think they will give more money when they graduate? Of course they will. They loved it. It was powerful. And we want to give our times and talent and resources to organizations that really impact us. So as a coach, I think by asking the right questions, what's going well here, where are you off, using those 5 areas of well-being, it drives a great conversation because it aligns so deeply to the mission of the school. Second, where are the spots on campus you already have natural touch points? That's the second part. Third, how do we create the right advisory on campus that represents the spots that you have the greatest amount of touch points? I've seen schools that said, our advisory is going to be made up of all people from the Career Center. Well, are you only going to launch strengths to the Career Center? No. Okay, well, let's get a greater representation. And so, faculty and staff in those different areas represented. I think last, you really need an executive champion. If you can find an executive champion that buys into the vision about how strengths impacts engagement well-being over 4 years, that's really key. I think you'll be at a really good spot. And the reality is that schools are challenged right now. They're at a hard spot right now. And boy, they could really just use your hand extending outward and saying, hard time, big challenges right now. Let's do this together. And that's going to elevate the conversations you have from maybe the Career Center, which is wonderful, but at a different level to really that executive level. So we need to be consultants that are really driving everything we're doing towards the points of pain and or fears of the university. If you do that, I think you'll be in a great spot. And lastly, I think oftentimes, I said it earlier, but we try to say strengths is all things to all people. Sometimes whenever I go to the doctor, I'll have a sore throat, I have a sinus infection. I feel like they give me a Z-Pack every single time. Here's your Z-Pack. I'm like, well, I don't know. I had that last time. Well, same thing, Z-Pack. And I think sometimes we try to say strengths is the Z-Pack. It's all things to all people. It's powerful all the time, and it's life-changing all the time. But we need to individualize what we're doing on a campus towards what they're challenged by. And if we could do that and then create the right mission and vision statement that everyone buys in at the beginning of the year, if you're sitting there and you're watching the president speak to all faculty, staff, and students, and you get to be there, you'll figure out that they will cast that vision for everyone. We are a strength-based campus that is using strengths to impact the engagement and well-being. This is how. Here's my top 5. This is my well-being engagement. You'll see that vision flow, and you're going to be in a long-term trusted advisor relationship.
Tom, how do we get involved from a Gallup? This is a question for me because I don't know. This is an area that I have not dug into myself. So this is my question to you. When does Gallup get involved? Do we put people on campus? How do we activate on this? How are we a part of this university community and are working with it?
Yeah, so right now we work with about 600 campuses. And our team, which is about 6 or 7 of us, our team will get a call from a school, or we'll call the school. And they'll say, we have a challenge, we need your help. And we'll start to try to figure out what we can do to help. When we offer coaching courses, whether it be open and or closed on a campus, intentionally ahead of time, we will say, boy, you're about to go through an amazing learning experience. However, you need to figure out how to create a cascading model throughout your organization. You have 10,000 students. You as a coach, or you and 20 other coaches, can't touch 10,000 students. So I want you to think about a cascading model. Who could you teach? Who could they teach? How do we get to this deeper dive? How do we start to help everyone understand? So when a school first calls, or we call them, we start to ask those questions. Why strengths? In fact, a common response for us is we'll say, why strengths? They'll go, we don't know. And we'll say, then come back to us. Spend some time with a group around you and come back to us so we could really partner with you in the right way. But if they come back and say, this is why strengths, next we'll again dig into, do you have an advisor? Do you have an executive leader that you could partner with? And our team's doing that. When they're ready to create those 24 touch points and lay out the right strategy, I'm going to go in with a marker and a whiteboard and really start to chart the course for them to be able to go in the right direction so they can be successful. So our team really partners with schools to launch strengths, engagement, well-being to the full campus. That's where we're at our very best. And that's what we do really well. And I really think that that's why our schools don't leave. You know, we could claim, I don't know, probably 50, maybe 100 schools that are fully strength-based. They have been for 4 to 5 years, and they continue to get past that top 5 conversation and do a deep dive into, or deep 5. I mean,
that's a good,
5.
That's not bad. I like it.
Really
maybe we should trademark that.
Copyright. I got the copyright. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do as partners to schools. We see ourselves as consultants and advisors. But boy, if we have 20 coaches on campus, they actually need to be impacting about 20% of faculty and staff in order for us to be successful.
Wow, that's a pretty big number. I mean, do we find that hard to achieve in those first couple of years, or is that coming pretty easy?
We kind of say to a school, this is going to be a process. So we'll say we need to chart off 4 years. I'll go, well, let's start with year 1. Let's try to lay out some goals for years 2, 3, and 4 now, but we're kind of guessing. Let's go to year 1. What happens if year 1, you could create a cascading model that 10% of faculty and staff would have an idea what is strengths, what is engagement, what is well-being. They would start to be able to understand what a strength-based lens looks like compared to just simply their top 5. And the next year we'll get that next, 10%. Now, again, our best schools have stopped saying faculty and staff. They said students as well. That peer model of mentoring is powerful. In fact, at schools where we've driven strengths through students alone, where staff are kind of mentoring, but as a whole, it's students. The best thing is whenever I've arrived to that campus, the president is there every single time. Why? A student set up an appointment, walked into the room and said, we're going to be doing an event on campus to help our students thrive in their engagement well-being. We're going to use this amazing tool, Clifton Strengths, to be able to help them get there. Would you be willing to come and introduce Tom, who's going to be speaking, and just hang out with us? The president's there every time because a student asked them. And so we see this time and time again. And so really, that's how we partner with schools. And we need great coaches that are willing to expand their thinking and really partner with us about how can we, as coaches, impact the points of pain of the university, the well-being and engagement, which impacts short-term and long-term, who they're going to be, helps them get great jobs. In fact, my last example, we were working with a school, a very prestigious school in the Chicago area, in the Illinois area, I'll say. And they said, Tom, we have been given some feedback by employers. They would say they appreciate that our students understand their top 5. Oh, but here's their problem. At times, they're kind of egotistical. They really don't have a growth mindset, more of a fixed, and they don't understand how to own their own engagement. They think that it's our responsibility to create an engaged world for them. But what we want them to be able to do is understand how their strengths impact their own engagement, how they can create their own action plans to get deeply involved. Plus, we want them to be able to trust each other. And that's where these areas of 5 areas of well-being come into play. If they can thrive in their social well-being and their community well-being, they begin to trust each other. Banks, if you work at a bank, you begin to pass on leads because you want to partner more there as well. So that's a different example of a school that's saying, here's a challenge area. We need to improve. We're going to use a strength-based approach, how, and the why is to help our students thrive in their career by understanding their engagement well-being.
Mark Pogue directs our Clifton Strengths Institute at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And of course, we've interviewed Mark, and they have set up a system of student coaches who actually coach students. How important is that in the model? And from a Strengths Institute standpoint, Tom, how do you see us leading the way at UNL? And how are we doing in that? And are other schools picking it up?
Actually, Mark is, I don't know, he's my best friend. Man, we've done life together for a long time. And so in our StrengthsQuest history, the program that Mark has launched at UNL is what we already learned previously from schools. So we are watching schools take off with this student mentoring coaching model. And we were watching them thrive in ways that we never expected. And again, that's a great example of why we could never be too prescriptive, because we would have missed that. We would have missed seeing that students can drive a more meaningful relationship than even Mark or I could. And so we began to look at all these schools launching through Strengths. And when we asked Mark to shift to UNL, this amazing, visionary, passionate person was able to look back at our previous experiences and say, boy, these models have really worked in amazing ways. And so they were able to impact really what's happening at UNL through our best practice, what we had learned along the way.
Last question for you, and unless you have any that you want to ask yourself. In this case, when we think about the tools that are available for Clifton Strength for Students and Strengths Finder, or Clifton Strengths now as we're calling it, I get a lot of questions from the coaching community, same, different, what's different, those kinds of things. Can you kind of just quickly address those pieces of the assessments, the reports, and the materials?
Yeah. I think for a while we drove too many activity-based things. So send us activities. We want more activities. And by asking for activities on a regular basis, that is an event-driven mindset. That's not a long-term growth mindset in terms of how we could shift. Instead, when we draw together groups and we have those deep, meaningful relationship conversations about well-being engagement, we start to see them own their strengths in a new way because they can see how they're woven. So on the what was previously the StrengthsQuest website, and now is becoming the Clifton Strengths for Students website, I have written what is really kind of a coaching guide. It could be that a coach gives it to someone. It's kind of divided up by 4 different levels of conversation. It could be that a faculty or staff would say these 4 different levels of conversation. So that links directly to the book. Challenge is that students will want to drive that conversation even more because they're thinking about how do I get more engaged. They're thinking about what we learned with the Gallup Purdue Index. One of the things that we learned is that we needed a professor that helps them be excited about their learning. So we're looking at their top 5 and we're saying, boy, how could you use your top 5? This is what the action items will say to find that professor that makes you excited about learning. Who could you be asking? How do you figure out who's the right one for you and the way you love to learn? We know that they need a professor that cares about them as a person. So we're looking at their action items to figure those things out, to find that person that is the right partnership for them. We know they need a mentor. So we'll be using strategic and maximizer and individualization and connectedness to find the right mentor. That's what the action items are going to direct them to do. And they're going to see those a lot more on our site as we really give ongoing examples of this is how you could do those things. We know that they need an internship or something that allows them to apply their learning, over a course of a year. And so, again, the action items are written that way. And finally, this last one has always been interesting to me. We have a culture nowadays that thinks they need to build their college resume with 10, 15 things I'm involved in. Look at all the things I'm involved in. I have a list that's 1 million pages longer than yours. Jim, you're a slacker. I'm not a slacker. But one of the things we found with the Gallup Purdue Index when we were asking alumni to think about, their own engagement, their own well-being, how'd they get there? One of the things that was a recurring pattern that we wrote a lot about in the book was they were extremely and deeply involved in just a few things. Organizations want students that understand what it means to go through the ups and downs. See, look, I'm doing that right on the screen. The ups and downs of the tension of an organization. So if they were taking on a leadership position on campus and it was one of 20, they're not really feeling the tension that that organization and or role could be, or really how it's going to be impacting them. But if they're deeply involved and they really start to understand those things, it helps them long term to be able to deal with those things again. It teaches resiliency. It teaches them that they can really own their own engagement and get deeply involved, and they need to stick in there when times are tough. So when organizations are out there hiring, they don't want a generic list of all the things you are involved in as a student, but rather, how did you get deeply involved? And so that by looking at the Gallup Purdue Index, we're going to be putting those things on the website on a regular basis. We're going to be doing a lot more video type experiences, webinars. We have the new journal that's on there. And I'll just be doing a lot more writing to really set up that site for success long-term, not activity-based, but conversation-based. So that's the shift that we're making right now. That obviously goes right alongside with all we've learned through the book.
Yeah, and I would say if you have not been out to StrengthsQuest.com, eventually it will change. I think it's still StrengthsQuest.com today, as of today. I think that will, or is it redirect you to the new?
It is new and shiny.
We are literally in the middle. We are literally in the middle of all this.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the transition.
If we go to Strengths Quest, yeah, it'll take you to the new site. There's lots of resources out there available for you. We ask you to go out and take a peek at it. Tom, I don't know what Jim, I don't know.
I have a video on there. Isn't that fun? I have a video on the site. But back then I had hair, Jim. I had a lot of hair. And the video that's on there, I just have to say it. We're in the middle of one of the biggest blizzards of Washington, D.C. ever. And the person called that was going to film it said, you need to get over here. We might lose power. So I was running down the streets of Washington, D.C. My hair was matted down. I was soaking wet. And I walked in and he said, you have about 8 to 10 minutes to film this. You're going to get one take, maybe two. Go. And I was on trying to speak about what we've learned. And so that's the video. If anyone mocks me, I'm just not going to be your friend anymore. But it's a great video. It's going to help you go in the right direction. And a lot of our clients show it to others. A lot of our coaches do the same thing. They show it to clients. So great resource as well. Yeah. It's on. Just scroll down a couple pages and it's down there at the bottom. And you got some great hair on that video. No longer. I mean, it's just, I'm losing it there, Jim. I am not gonna, it looks great either way, Tom. Looks great. Hey, I don't know what I don't know. Anything else that I missed that we might want to cover just before we wrap things up? Any big points that I missed? Yeah, boy, we need all the coaches to partner with us. 600 campuses. And again, there's roughly 6 of us on the team. We can't all really own 100 campuses each. But the best way the best way for coaches to partner with us is to understand this model that we know is successful. We know it's short term because we've seen our best practice schools do it over and over. We know it long-term because we know what the Gallup Purdue Index shows us. And so if we are walking in with an outcomes-based mindset and strengths is the how, Clifton Strengths is the how, and those outcomes is the why, we're going to create just a really incredible partnership. So we need you. We need the life change that you bring and the depth of conversation that you bring. So we're really excited. We're really excited for the new book to launch. We're really excited about this new direction. And boy, I'm just excited to be here today with all of you, even you, Jim. I love you.
Oh, Tom, that's so nice of you to say.
Yeah,
Micah doesn't even say that to me.
I don't have woo. I do the fake woo thing. I do the best I can. But I love your authenticity, and so it's really a gift to be on here.
Thanks, friend. It's good to spend time with you. I don't get enough of that. I try to run into you every time you're on the campus here in Omaha, but great to spend time with you. If coaches had questions on the StrengthsQuest site, as it is today on the Clifton Strengths for Students site, there's a contact form. If they have some questions, is it okay to put some info in there and send it in? Will somebody get back to them if they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Our team is really great at responding. And I have a great group around me that's really going to respond ASAP. And when the right time is there, I'm going to walk in and work with a group of coaches and or a group of leaders on a campus. But boy, they're going to respond right away and really respond with a really kind of a growth mindset, partnership mentality. So I think that's perfect.
Great. So if you're interested in either way and have any questions, jump out right today, StrengthsQuest.com. That will always redirect to whatever, if we change that URL. But that being said, scroll on down. There's a contact form on the page. Fill that out and get it in. It'll get to the team. That's really the best way to get information or questions to our team. Tom, thanks for coming on today. Great to have you. I appreciate it. Hang tight for 1 second. I'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strength Center. It's GallupStrengthsCenter.com. Don't forget the resources available on our StrengthsQuest site as well. And again, we're going through some changes on that. But for today, there's all those resources. There's a lot of things available out there. We've got a lot of stuff for you that's available on the site, and you can head out there. Don't forget to take advantage. If you have questions or comments about anything coaching related, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget, we also have the recorded audio and video of this program, plus the past ones. We talked about Mark Pogue. Tom, I've recorded 3 or 4 of these with Mark, and they are dynamite. And so they're available on our coaches blog. If you head out there and search for them, you can find them. And we want to thank everyone for coming out today. By the way, the coaches blog is coaching.gallup.com. We want to thank everyone for coming out today, and we'll look forward to the next call to coach. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.